Okay. It is now in order to consider amendment number 16, printed in Part A of House Report 115-2. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in Part A of House Report number 115-2, offered by Mr. Posey of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 33, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, and a member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is about transparency and accountability. I rise to urge my colleagues to support it. When an agency decides to write a rule or revise an old one, they're sometimes required to share technical or scientific information to support their proposal. For many years, scientific research has relied upon the peer review process to ensure quality, integrity, and objectivity of published work. Peer review is when scientists open their research to the scrutiny of other experts in the field in order to receive feedback, criticism, and ensure their conclusions are sound. Unfortunately, when peer reviews of information return unfavorable comments or raise unforeseen issues of quality of work, some agencies have acted to silence or hide the critiques. This, of course, is bad science, and it results in bad public policy. A recent example of this abuse occurred during a highly technical rulemaking proceeding in which an agency relied heavily upon a single study that many criticized as profoundly inadequate. The agency commissioned 2 peer reviews of the study, which were completed and returned 2 weeks into the comment period for the public. However, after both scholars submitted highly critical reviews that echoed the concerns of the many commentators, sadly, the agency withheld the release of their work to the public. When the agency finally did release the information as required by law, it was on a Friday that marked the very last day of the comment period, as part of the mass negative document dump that buried the negative reviews. The political cherry-picking of scientific information and manipulation of the public record harms both the quality of federal regulations as well as the overall integrity of the rulemaking proceeding. When federal agencies distribute scientific research supporting a proposed rule, the public and those affected by it deserve to be certain that the science is of the highest quality and have a due process right to comment meaningfully on the rules the science intends to support. My amendment will help protect this basic principle of good government and ensure fairness in federal rulemaking by requiring that the public be provided with a clear timeline for disclosure of any influential scientific information. The amendment will also require agencies to offer an explanation if they revise the anticipated public release date of peer reviews. Simply put, the federal agency will no longer be able to shield from the public view the existence of information that's central to evaluating a proposed rule. We cannot continue to allow the federal agencies to march toward a predetermined outcome at the expense of sound science and policy. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Florida. With that, I thank you, Mr. Chair. I oppose this amendment, which requires that an agency publish a list of scientific information relating to a rule or expected to relate to the rule for each rule that an agency expects to propose for the following year. I am concerned that this amendment would create unintended consequences and operate as a one-way ratchet to slow down and stop the rulemaking process by requiring the burdensome disclosures and creating options for procedural gridlock. Agencies are already required to publish relevant data in support of a rule during these rulemaking processes. Rules that do not appear to be based on a reasoned analysis of relevant data may be vacated by reviewing courts as arbitrary or capricious. Moreover, data required through federally funded research is already accessible to researchers who have a legitimate purpose. I am also concerned that because this amendment does not define scientific information or clarify the scope of this publication requirement, peer-reviewed materials may be taken out of context or otherwise misused for political purposes. In so doing, this requirement may chill feedback in the scientific community, undermine agencies' ability to adopt the best rules possible, or otherwise manufacture delays in the rulemaking process. Any additional requirements in this area should strengthen rather than weaken the process of science-based rulemaking. Given these concerns, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
How much time do I have?
The gentleman has 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, most members of the public don't know what a rule is. Rules are laws made by unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats. We collected 4 years' worth of daily registers in my office. Those are executive orders, rules, proposed rules, changes to rules. And I ask people how big they think the stack is, and I get answers 4 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet. Well, actually, in 4 years' time, the stack was 7 stacks over my head, over 70 linear feet of laws made by unelected, unaccountable people. Now, the public thinks we make the laws. Most of the laws we don't make. We allow unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats to make the laws. And the very least we can do to protect the public is ensure that we have transparency and accountability for their procedures, and that's exactly what this amendment does. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman contains the remainder of the time. How much time is left? How much? 1 minute. The gentleman has 1 minute left.
Okay. I'll close. Mr. Chairman, before I close, I'd like to submit for the record a letter from a leading policy research institution that highlights the need for legislation like my amendment that will improve the public peer review process in our federal agencies. As the letter states, no presumption of scientific legitimacy can be afforded when making good public policy. Unfortunately, many administrative agencies make this assumption and do not take seriously the peer review process. For that reason, I once again urge my colleagues to support this good government proposal for transparency and accountability that will help protect the integrity of the federal rulemaking process. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's request will be covered by general leave. The gentleman yield back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair is the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of